Welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today I'm talking to Brent Keltner. Brent is the founder and president of Winalytics, a go-to-market and revenue acceleration consultancy, which helps clients reach their top growth potential by personalizing value in sales and go-to-market strategy to each buyer's roles, goals, and market segment. Before starting Winalytics, Brent was a revenue leader for more than a decade at various companies and began his career as a Ph.D. social scientist and has written the Revenue Acceleration Playbook and has been featured in several publications. And he is on a mission to help his clients reach their growth and sales potential. Brent, welcome to the pod.
Hey, Raul, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, no, absolutely. I've been having I'm looking forward to this one because as a sales or revenue leader, I've had wins and I've had failures. Let me tell you, it's better to have wins than failures, but sometimes you got to go through the failures, man. Get punched in the face a couple of times and be kicked in the nose. So I know you felt that the same, but what I want to start here with, what's the biggest aha moment you've had in this role, and why is this particular role of revenue or leadership in sales and marketing different from most leadership roles?
Yeah, you just said it. I do karate with my kids, and in our dojo, the expression I love is 7 times down, 8 times up. You get knocked down a lot. That's not the
Yep.
point. The point is, how often do you get up? And
Yeah.
I think we as human beings don't like rejection. We don't like to hear no. We don't like to feel like we're being pushy or people don't like us. And so that polite persistence pushing in sales, it's hard, but you got to do it. And so I think you just take a lot more hits to your ego in
Yeah.
selling than a lot of other roles, and you just got to absorb it as part of the job and do it politely.
That's key. That's obviously you've learned that level of class through the experience. What would be some of the things you're telling yourself as you're getting back up? Because I think that's one of the things that for our listeners and even for me, like it's how you get up. It's not just the fact that you get up. What are some of the things that are going through your mind? What are some of the anchors that you've placed yourself in?
Yeah, I mean, what I do, and I think I do meditation as part of, one of my kind of spiritual practices, so to speak. And people do meditation, there's a visualization component to
Mm.
that. And so I have a couple of episodes, one at Edge Ventures, one here at Winalytics right as the pandemic hit, we lost 40% of revenue in a month, right? One
Oh,
month to the next, as a bunch of our early growth clients just peeled off. I take myself back to that moment and I just think about, and at the Edge of Ventures, it was like we were launching peer benchmarking programs and we got one out the door, just like boom. And then the second one, man, we floundered and floundered. It looked like it was going to be 3 strikes and you're out. And finally we
dang.
figured it out. Second program went, third program, fourth program grew a great division. So I always just take myself back to those moments and remember like the despair I felt
Yeah.
and the fact that often when you feel the worst, it's saying it's darkest right before the dawn. There is, if you keep going and you keep being intelligent and iterative and polite, there is a path forward. So I'll think about
Mhm.
that. And then I'll think about also some of the clients that I didn't get that would have been a nightmare to get. It's like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
it's the expression of, hey, great, we won IBM. It's, oh, SHIT, we won IBM because they're going to take our company. Not every customer is good. So sometimes when you take a hit, it's one door shut, a window open. And I try and think
Yeah.
about that.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I always like to make sure that we touch on that real component that we all face. And at least for our listeners, that's been a theme for some of the pods. It's how are we getting back up? How are we thinking about failure? Why is failure a prerequisite to success? And how others have gone through that so that we can at least apply some of these tools or principles in our own life and our own practice. I want to dive into more strategic or more on the revenue side of questions because one of the things that I think is important with go to market, with scaling, with offer creation, value creation is the idea, and this could be an ethereal idea, but I want to help you create this into a tactic, is that our clients or our buyers or your customers, whatever you want to call them, they are the source of truth, their emotions, what they go through, their problems, what they're facing. How do you create feedback loops in such a way where you can constantly tap into that, let's call that the client mind, so that you can reposition, have better sales scripts, better conversations, upsells, cross sells, win backs, etc. Like, what do we do to arrive to that
Ask them.
all the
I
time?
mean,
Well, let's
I'm being a little
tactically, like,
cheeky, but
yeah,
we believe 100% our whole method. If you're going to build out your value prop, it's got to start with the customer voice. The
Yeah.
customer is the one source of truth. And when you go and you ask your clients why they don't understand better the customer voice, it's because they've never asked.
No,
They never
frankly,
go
to
and
begin
ask
with.
them,
Yeah.
tell me how a very simple technique, interviewing technique that we do all the time is, hey, I'd love to set up a 30-minute call. I want to hear what's gone, like where are you seeing the most value? I also want to hear what we could improve as
Mhm.
we deepen our partnership. So this isn't about a raw call, whether it's whatever client we're working, it's not about a raw call about the client. It's I legitimately, authentically want to hear where you're deriving value and where you're not deriving value.
Okay.
And so
Just
for
to
us, like the truth is your customers telling you by goal area, by role, right? We have multiple personas we sell to, different segments. And I can give an example that different market segments buy for different reasons. We have to hear it from them
Mhm.
before it's true. If they haven't said it, it's just a hypothesis about value.
I love that. And again, I wanted to get to like ground zero simplicity and obvious because sometimes, in my opinion, we complicate it. We want to create a data lake, extract their online experience, their reviews, what they're saying on the website, what they're saying to others on conversations, and what is it, little silent interview sessions and stuff like that. So I think the most basic approach is creating a transparency call. What's good and what's bad? Let's actually have that conversation. And that is time intensive and limited to how many people you can call. Do you go beyond that? What are some of the other things that you do to create that brain of the customer voice?
Yeah, I love that transparency call. That's a good term for it. And one of the things you can think about is when we do this with clients and we're going to with them or for them interview, in a transparency call, you want to go into that with some hypotheses
Hmm.
about value, right? 4 or 5 areas I think I'm driving value for you. Because if you just go in totally open ended, you can't pattern recognize.
Yeah.
But if you just have 4 or 5, we're working with a company called Serify that it's brought together a bunch of professional training platforms. And there is an angle about certification rates, like higher pass rates. There's an angle about learner convenience because you're consolidating different programmings. There's an angle about the learning administrator in terms of being able to track and report. So there's 3 or 4 things you're going to probe on to see where the energy is. So I think that transparency call, but
Hmm.
go in with some of your hypotheses about where you're adding value. And then you'll just start to see, hey, the C suite thinks something different than the director that's buying this. You'll see something when we did some work with a company called Torchlight,
Mhm.
caregiver platform, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically helping people that have an adult parent or a kid that they're giving care for. It was clear those 3 or 4 hypotheses in a manufacturing or a retail sector, time on task, jumping off the chart, right?
Yeah.
Don't want people in their car going to the hospital all day. In the financial service sector, the engagement that created career paths, particularly for women leaders who might check out, jumping off the chart. So you will, if you just create some simple hypotheses about how you derive value, easier for you to see what your customers actually care about.
What's a statistical significant interview number? Like, because
I,
for B2B, it might be limited. For B2C, you might open it up to the floodgates. So, what are we looking for?
I love that you just asked that because I was trained as a social scientist at Stanford and the Rand Corporation, and I did qualitative research. And so, to statistical significance in data is like 400 observations.
Yeah.
The
Wow.
thing is, in qualitative interview, you'll start to see the patterns emerge in the low teens,
Okay. I usually say
12,
21.
13, 14.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
love that. Oh,
21 is great, but I did this for a decade and I would
yeah.
do interviews of bankers and telecoms or whatever. The pattern the bulk pattern would always emerge in the low to mid teens. And so you don't need a ton,
That's
right?
great.
Just commit. And look, if you're just quarterly getting 3 or 4 interviews, those patterns are going to fall out to you.
Yeah, it's very clear. No, I love that. And thank you for validating that because the rule of 21 that I came up with is usually around 14 to 17, you start seeing the patterns. But the goal to hit 21 is okay, can you assume what they're going to say from 17 or 18 to 21? And if you can, you've hit the nail on the head. But if you can't, then you got to do
Yeah.
more work.
Yeah. I mean, your degree of certainty at 20 is a lot higher than 12. But yes, so I
You
love
still get
that
the same
validation.
principles.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. And I think that's a simple practice we can incorporate in habits, like you mentioned, quarterly, maybe every 60 days or so to really dive into that. And when you dive into what's valuable, what's not valuable, how do you translate that? Because I My personal approach and experience has been a lot with marketing, positioning, influencing sales, influencing product through the voice of the customer, through marketing, through actual, not just tactics and hype, like I don't care, but more strategy. And your approach is lab plus the sales front, the actual working with the salespeople, how they're actually engaging. How do you take those insights and disseminate that across the organization in a holistic way? Because I know that's easier said than done.
Yeah, yeah. And you and I had a pre-call on this, right? The field enablement piece. So the beauty about those transparency calls, as you call them, is look, anybody will record the, hey, can I just record it so I don't have to take notes? You asked that at the beginning. And now what you have is on the good ones, you already have your story.
Yeah.
Basically, you've got a one-page success story that can be translated into a snappable slide where you can pick out a couple of snippets that you could put on your website or in a prospecting sequence. Those transparency calls to me are the single most important content, which you got to cut it up, right? Make it
Mhm.
accessible to your sales team. Hey, here are our best ones in manufacturing. Here are our best ones in financial services. Here are our best ones in retail. But it's the
Segment.
same guts of that call that can then create the enablement for your sales or your success team, how to help them tell the story better in the customer voice.
And then you can use that with scripting and or positioning the product or service depending on what who you're talking to, right? So the salesperson or the sales team, sales floor can adopt and not modify out of integrity, but change the story narrative in alignment to who they're talking with so that the value is clearly communicated.
Exactly right. And so to really enable sales, the one other thing you have to do, which you don't have to do in marketing, because in marketing, you're just telling the story,
Yeah.
is in sales, you have to then take those hypotheses that are in your transparency call, turn them into good questions that now your salespeople can guide. They don't proclaim the value, they guide people towards, do you have that problem?
Yeah.
Right? What's it costing you to not solve that problem? What is it that's, what's the principal pain? Here's how we solve it. Telling is not selling, right? We got to
Yeah.
guide them to their own pain. Then we present how we might address it. If you just give salespeople the content, they pitch all day long. So you
Yeah.
got the discipline of discovery and hearing it from the buyer. What the buyer success statement is a key part of the sales enablement as well.
That sounds like an anchor in your practice that when you're working with salespeople, you want the way that you're educating or training or managing them isn't here's the offer, here's the pitch, go sell. More here's the empowerment to ask the right questions, and it's up to you to guide. And is that kind of like your thesis around that approach?
That's exactly right. I mean, but a term we coined from one of our clients, Russ Jackson, brilliant guy at NECI, is situational fluency.
Oh, I love that.
So you're going to have to pay him too royalties every time you use it. I'm kidding. That's what he said to
Ah,
us. We started to use it all the time after I heard him say it. But yes, you have to. Your good salespeople are guides. That's a good summary. And you're giving them the right questions, the guide,
yeah,
by
yeah,
persona or by situation to guide. And then you're giving them the content. We call it value discovery. Why are they talking to you? What do they value? And then value personalization is I can share back the right capability stories. How do I close a gap? I can share back the right customer stories, right, to build
that's key.
social proof.
And we'll talk about price points and where we can leverage this actually online versus in person. But I think that's a huge aha moment for our listeners. And from my experience with sales teams, sales floors, and the fact that you're empowering them, it's so simple. It's so simple that it feels stupid to miss, but sometimes we can get stuck in our own growth. That you're empowering the team with the tools, not how to sell, but how to guide. And I think that's a huge shift because if you start creating like in, I wanted to just say Sherlock Holmes, but if you start creating a sales floor that is more inquisitive and focused, like what do they need and how does this tie back to value versus how do I hammer them with like my sales pitch and close them every time? That, in my opinion, is a core transformation that just that simple. I'm pretty sure we can change sales organizations, quite frankly.
You can, and the beauty of it is building on your direction is those things are very auditable, self auditable for a salesperson or by their manager. Two simple things we do is in a product discussion. So you're in a sales call, you think you finish your discovery,
Yeah.
you're not going to move on to present your solution. If you can't repeat back to your buyer, I heard you say, I understand that what you're working on. I understand your top goal is, therefore, this is why I'm showing you this product. You haven't done your discovery.
Dang. Okay.
At the end of the day, if you don't have a personalization phrase, you are product pitching by definition. So you got to map it back to what they value, and you can hear it in a call. You got it or you didn't got it, and you can see it in an email. Hey, thanks for your time. I understand that we say you should be able to recap both what are they working on, their goal, and their gap to goal. What's keeping them from getting there?
Exactly.
I understand you're trying to improve past test rates, but you don't actually know who's completing certification courses. You need visibility on that. This
Yeah.
is how Serify addresses that. So you can audit that right in an email.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. When do you, so as a peripheral to that one, when do you see it's a right move to use product pitching versus personalized?
I would never, I don't think it's ever good. Look, you're always presenting your product,
Yeah.
but we talk about micro presentations as opposed to a product pitch. And there's probably two or three big differences. One is that you should never spend more than 5 or 7 minutes on your product before you stop for feedback.
Okay.
Because it's not about your product. It's
It's
does
about
your
them.
buyer see your product solving a problem?
Yeah.
So you want to say, hey, I understand you're working on this. Here's how we solve it. Do you see, now I've walked you through it, do you see where you could apply that in your organization? One of my
Bringing
pet
it back
peeves
to
that
them.
you'll now start to hear all the time in product demos is, hey, what do you think? Any questions? Isn't that cool? Totally useless questions.
Exactly. The one
Totally
question is, do you
useless.
have any questions? That just opens up the mind for a feedback loop that they don't need to fill. You want to pre-fill or have the silo of the bucket that they want to fill and then have them fill it based on the buckets you create, not have them create their own buckets. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
to go back to what you just said, you want them to guide.
Yeah.
Do you see how this could solve that problem we talked about?
Yep.
Our customers use this workflow to solve this problem, common problem everybody faces. Do you see how that could work for you? So we're trying to guide them towards fit. So you need to 5 to 7 minutes, you stop, ask a guided question to see if we're getting closer to fit. And then look, it's always good to actually name drop stories, other people like you that I worked with on that. That's the difference between a product pitch and a micro presentation.
Yeah, and it feels personal. It's an alignment to what they're actually seeking to solve. We can customize it based on their internal psychology and desires and the languaging. There's so much packed into what you're doing based on what I focus on the marketing side that I love this, like this conversation. I love it. Let's dive into, because this is something that you discussed and we had a conversation around product like led growth versus actual marketing and sales behind a solid product. Not too much on the PLG front, but more around transaction volumes and when does it make sense to have a phone call? Because one of my thesis and my assertions is right now with the AI stuff, like people are going to try to replace chats, sales conversations, qualifications, SQLs, et cetera. They're going to try to replace that. But my flag in the ground is when there is an interaction or whenever there's human trust and emotion, that intersection will have to be done human to human. And sales is where trust and emotion go hand in hand. Where do you see the cutoff being where we can automate or have front facing sales and marketing material to have a transaction or have a buyer versus we need to actually have a discovery session? We need to go meet the client in person. We need to get on the phone call, build that relationship.
I would say, hey, below 1,000, below 1,500, yeah, you can probably sell online all day long. There's this big gray area to me between about 1,500 and 5,000, where
Mm.
it's hard to staff with people, but you're getting into this area where probably somebody's going to have to go talk to somebody else. It's enough spend. Hey, do you care? And can I use my budget in this way? Definitely above 5,000. There's an internal conversation going on, and I always just find it hilarious when salespeople are like, they're not talking to each other. And I'm like, it's not their job to talk to each other. It's
Yeah.
our job to connect value for them to understand why they want to buy together. So the reality is you get above 5,000 and there's approvals process and multiple people that are going to get involved in some way. So you have to be having a conversation and guiding your champion to guide the next conversation.
Empowering
There's
them.
this big gray area, what you do between 1,500 and 500. And term we talk a lot about that you've already touched on is personalization at scale. It's not one-to-one personalization. But if you're good at pattern recognizing by persona what people value, like by role, and if you're good at pattern recognizing in different segments and name dropping peers, you can personalize. You can speak to people personally. Hey, we know a lot of folks in manufacturing working on caregiving. They have this challenge of time off task. Is that
Yeah.
something you're working on? Could we said nothing specific to them, but I am understanding where they walk every day.
Yeah.
And so building those, your stories around personas and around segments, name dropping peers that you work with does personalize at scale in a way that builds efficiency into the sales and marketing motion.
Yeah. It builds that framework and it allows them to grow. What is, and this is a free range question, anywhere in marketing or sales or revenue or leadership, what do you believe to be true in that realm that others would disagree with you on?
I would say it this way, that success in marketing and sales really in the current environment is all about mindset. I
Okay.
think a lot of people increasingly agree with that. We have to have growth mindset. We have to have whatever mindset, but I think they're thinking about it slightly wrong
Okay.
because really the mindset you need to have is serve the other first.
Interesting. As opposed to what's currently out there right now.
Well, most of the focus is on growth mindset,
Personal, I
right?
have to be a warrior, winner, seize the day.
Exactly. I am constantly improving. I wrote a blog post about this, and there is nobody, there are very few people have as strong as growth mindset as me, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't learn to lead a team until something flipped around every conversation, internal conversation, external conversation. You got to put the other first because if you're putting yourself first, like the karma is just going the wrong direction, right? So I think the mindset shift is, yeah, I can grow individually, but in the current environment where I really need to, in my internal and external conversations, constantly re-anchor on what other people value, constantly re-recruit my
Mm,
customers, constantly re-recruit my top players. And it takes a level of humility
yeah.
that our brains are not wired for because our brains are wired to think about ourselves first and they're wired to think about to start with a conclusion
It's
and then go find
irrational. Yeah.
evidence to support that conclusion. So our minds are wired in exactly the wrong way to be successful. Most successful teams we work with, the most dominant characteristic is humility. Everybody in that team realizes, CEO realizes they have things to learn and are
Oh
open
yeah.
to learning them.
Yeah, I've spoken to a recently exited last couple years, huge windfall, and the most humble guy that I've had the pleasure to be on a phone call with. And he's a giver, not just focusing on what can I get out of you, which I've had those conversations, but he's like, how can I help you? I was like, whoa, what are you like? What did I? And I don't know if I think that with the science, you'll know this more than I do, that we're wired to think about ourselves, protection, self defense. But I also find that is the giving, the self giving, that's somewhat natural. We see it somewhat in other areas of life outside of business, but it is a huge paradigm shift to, hey, not for me to be a floor mat. Of course, now that we have to balance that fake humility with true humility, which I think the best definition I've heard for humility is to tell the truth. Like, this is what it is in reality. And if I don't know something, it's humble for me to say, I don't know anything about that. Let me learn and figure that out. So I think that's key. And I love that.
Well,
Brent.
I just want to build on that thought before we might transition to something else. But what you just said about being a guide and this idea of at the end of the demo, it's confirming where my buyer sees value.
Yeah.
Humans are giving and we know we have to exist in tribes, but really good revenue, sales, marketing, CS leadership, it's this habit of always re-anchoring on the other,
Huh.
always
Okay.
reconfirming their why, always reconfirming where they're seeing value, what they're willing to do about it. That's what makes the difference between good and great growth trajectories.
I think I'll close and I'll steal this close from a good book mentor. Wish I met him in person. Ziegler is that you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. The basic principle of helping others get what they want, you will achieve the success that you want to achieve. Brent, for our listeners out there, what's the best place for one to thank you for being on, and two, learn a little bit more about what you're up to?
Yeah, I would just go if they want to go to the website Authenticity Wins, take you right to our book webpage, and they can download the first chapter of the book for free, which has a good overview, and that actually links to our corporate page. So they're
Beautiful.
welcome to just go to authenticitywins.com or they can reach out to Brent Keltner on LinkedIn. There's only one last time I checked. Always happy to communicate and share ideas with people there for sure.
I love that. We'll put those links in the show notes and we'll go from here, Brent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, really enjoyed it, Raul.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.